Hey there everyone, Steve the Amateur Historian. How are y'all doing tonight? Now when I first started looking into general murders around Oregon, which I think the first time I really started doing that, looking at things outside of the Portland area, was about 3 years ago, 2.5 to 3 years ago. And one of the things I stumbled upon was this succession of murder cases, many of which went unsolved, or at least if they were solved, were unsolved for a very long time, that happened from the early to mid 70s into the early 80s, that predominantly occurred around the Salem, Corvallis area. And tonight's story is just another one in with that mix. And I've covered several other cases tied to that, including the murder of Tina Michelle Migas, who was, it's unknown where she was killed, but her remains were found in 2 different locations just outside of Salem. I did a video about a woman named Kathy Owens who was murdered, and the actual killer wasn't actually brought to justice till many years later. So there's a lot of them. And this particular story was one I was only able to find a few little pieces of information on, and so I kind of put it aside till I would at least be able to gain more information about the overall circumstances of the case. And I'm coming back now to reassess it after actually finding some more information on it. So this is another murder case out of that time, and out of, specifically in this case, the Salem, Oregon area. Tonight is the 1978 murder of a woman named Jean Marie Peters. So Jean Peters lived with her husband, Ronald, on Downs Street in Salem. She worked as an accountant. Actually, her and her husband and other members of her family actually worked out of the same building in Salem. And her and her husband owned a few different apartment complexes in the area, and one was known as the Glenona Apartments, which still stand today on Waller Street in Salem, not too far from where the Peters lived. And around sometime between 5 and 5:30 p.m. on September 9th, 1978, Jean left their home to show a interested party, a vacant unit that was available at the Glenona Apartments. According to her husband, he didn't even realize that she'd had this planned. It seemed like it was kind of a last minute thing. Oh, hey, I'm going to show this unit at the Glenona Apartments to somebody. And she departed and made the short trip to the apartment complex. Now, around 5:15 p.m., or maybe a little bit closer to 5:30 p.m., depending on which resource you look at, I know the particular individuals that reported this lived in the apartment complex. Around 5:15 p.m., there was the sounds of a struggle heard, as well as the sounds of a woman screaming. Now, there were 2 Willamette University students that had moved into the apartment complex only 2 days earlier. And they were the ones who heard the screaming and heard what they perceived as some kind of a struggle going on. And they contacted the police to report it. Now, what's interesting is these individuals, these university students, they lived, right in close proximity to the vacant unit that Jean was going to be showing. And another neighbor next door said that they heard a commotion. They heard what they said sounded like someone being thrown against a wall, but dismissed it as they thought somebody was like bouncing a basketball in their apartment and they were hearing the ball hitting the wall, but heard no screams. And another tenant who was attending to their laundry said they heard nothing at all. Which is interesting because if you look at the apartment complex, it's just one building. It's not like where I live, where there's like 13, 14 different buildings and it's like a whole massive property. This is just one kind of long apartment complex. It's 2 stories, it has 8 units, it's still called the Glenona today. You know, it's just one little thing by itself. So it's interesting that so many different people heard so many different things, or rather didn't hear anything at all. But obviously, these Willamette University students were concerned enough and they heard actual screams and contacted the police. By the account of the officers who passed by to check, they arrived at the Glenona at 5:32 p.m. They checked on the vacant unit in question. The door was locked, all sounded quiet inside, and they couldn't perceive any signs of a struggle having occurred there. And because the unit was locked, they departed. As one of the officers said, we can't just go around kicking doors in. So they departed. They didn't hear any screams, no scuffles, and it was kind of figured, they probably figured, oh, maybe someone was having a little domestic tiff and it got broken up. Maybe these Willamette students confused where they were hearing the sounds from and it was actually coming from somewhere else, and it perceivably wasn't an issue because, again, by the time the officer showed up there was no signs of anything. There was no noises. It came off as though nobody had gone into that vacant unit. Nobody of suspicion was seen walking around. It was as though absolutely nothing had happened at all. So they departed. About an hour passes since Jean left her home, and her husband Ronald starts getting a little bit concerned. When you show someone an apartment, they didn't live that far away, you show someone around a unit, at most, even if a prospective tenant has a lot of questions, she probably would have been done in about a half hour. Now an hour's gone by, so Ronald contacts a tenant there named Ross Harris, who he and his wife had lived at this unit for about a decade. So it stands to reason the Harrises and the Peters were, probably got along fairly well. And he asked them to check on this unit where his wife had supposedly gone to meet with a possible new tenant. They arrived there. The door was, again, locked. They couldn't get inside. Like, the police didn't see any signs of a struggle. They went back. They called Ronald and said, the door's locked, we can't get in there. So Ronald drove down to the apartment himself because he had a key, understandably, to the unit. He unlocked the door and they went inside. There was blood found in the kitchen and living room area of this vacant unit. Jean's glasses and keys were in the kitchen area as well. And when they entered the bedroom of the unit, they discovered Jean there on the floor, dead, having been stabbed multiple times. She was literally just stabbed to death. So the police are once again reported contacted, and they have another new murder case on their hands. And initially, law enforcement, they wouldn't state exactly how many times Jean had been stabbed. It was stated that she was still fully clothed, and it would later be determined that she had not been assaulted sexually, which seems to go in line with the fact that she was still fully clothed. One account given stated that struggles were heard in that apartment for several minutes. And there's blood found in multiple rooms, and those aren't even the rooms that Jean is finally finally dies in. So it appears that she fought really hard to get away, and probably just under the circumstances couldn't. It is possible that she fought so hard that the person finally just, had to keep grabbing at her and slashing at her and attacking her, and eventually just ended up killing her, and then realized, okay, I have to get out of here now. So maybe the attack was sexually motivated, and due to the circumstances of what occurred, the person responsible had to alter their plans so as to go uncaptured. Because if Gene's running around screaming and he's, potentially throwing her up against a wall, as one neighbor heard, the killer has to know, we're in an apartment complex. This isn't a house out in the woods. We're surrounded by other people, and those people are going to come checking the place out. They're going to call the police. You have to escape, rather quickly. And what is so astonishing is that it appears whoever was responsible for this, nobody saw the individual. And you'd think, you're hearing screams, you're hearing a struggle, you'd think at least one person in that unit would have been outside looking around at their window. Somebody would have seen whoever was responsible, as they understandably had to flee the scene. And the location in Salem where the apartment complex is, it's a road that becomes essentially a dead-end road. And it's just lined with apartment complexes. And you'd think in a tight area like that, somebody would have seen someone. But reportedly nobody saw a person of suspicion. And it is interesting. I did notice in an article published September 12th, so just a couple days after this murder, a member of the Salem police, a guy named Bill Kinch, came out and said that somebody was seen in the vicinity of those apartments in the immediate aftermath. No description is given. They don't explain the circumstances with which this individual was seen. Were they seen walking away from the apartment? Were they just loitering in the area? There's no real explanation behind it given. They just said that someone did see someone in the vicinity, but the police weren't considering that individual a suspect. And it seems like that possibility opened up and then just closed right away, and the police had decided that this was not a person of suspicion. Which makes me a little bit suspicious. It kind of does. Like, why would you even say that if this person wasn't even suspicious to you and you don't provide any real information about it? It was interesting. A weapon, whatever weapon was used to attack Gene, was not recovered from the apartment. No weapon was found. So, it's one of these cases, right out of the gate, authorities are in a tight position. They have a murder case on their hands. Nobody at the complex has seen whoever was responsible. And it's so interesting. You'd think this is a very stupid scenario for someone to try to set up a situation where they were going to kill someone. We don't know what happened, what was spoken about, whether an altercation sparked between Jean and whoever was with her in that apartment. But the presumption is whoever was responsible for this, contacted Jean under the guise of, hey, I want to look at the apartment, And it's interesting because Ronald, again, he didn't know anything about this. But perceivably, this guy contacts Jean and says, hey, I want to look at the apartment, and she goes down to show it to him. The fact that she's murdered, shortly after, it leads you to believe she was lured there specifically for this purpose. Again, whether the intent was sexual, it was just, a person who killed out of the love of killing. But, you lure someone to an apartment complex that they run. You have to arrive there. You maybe even have to wait for when she arrives. You're not going to know exactly when she's going to show up. She could show up at 5:02. She could show up at 5:07. You have to show up and perceivably wait there by the complex. You're just standing there, waiting to be seen by anybody in the area. I mean, even if he had managed to pull this crime off without Jean making a peep and nobody even knew what was happening, still, she would have eventually been found. Her husband could have verified, she left, sometime around between 5 and probably 5:15. So authorities are going to be thinking, okay, sometime between like 5:30 and or around 5:15 to 5:30, did anybody see anybody of suspicion out there? So this guy could still be drawing attention to himself. And then after he gets in and kills her, he has to escape without being unseen. Like this, you know, regardless of the circumstances that allowed this individual to get away with this horrible murder, this just seemed like the actions of kind of a novice criminal. This was not, as I see it, the actions of a seasoned criminal, someone who had probably killed multiple times before and had kind of established a kind of consistent pattern as to how they function, a modus operandi, so to speak. This just seemed like such a lazily formulated thing. And, it was one of those cases where nobody could think of anybody in their wildest dreams that would want to murder Jean Peters. The police couldn't really find a motive, and her husband was just, had no idea who would want to do something like this. And, again, under the circumstances of what happened, I almost wonder, is it possible that Jean knew this individual and there was some nefarious actions going on there? Which I know someone will hear that and immediately think, oh, I'm implying Jean was like cheating on her husband with someone. I'm not making that inference at all. I know that's where someone's mind would want to go. But what if, say, and I'm saying this simply for the sake of theorization and speculation, because this is an unsolved murder case that we all hope one day will be solved. And if it's sitting here getting colder by the day, you have to theorize about it to try to figure out what happened, but theorize responsibly and not give in to the most wild of possible ideas unless there's some substance there. There has to be a little, smoke before there's fire, if that's the right way to put it. I'm just contemplating whether this individual that was responsible for killing Jean, that maybe they knew one another, and maybe he for an example, maybe he was blackmailing her over something. Just as an example, maybe there was something that he was holding over her head, and he was having her meet with him, secretly to handle a situation, maybe to get some money out of her. And so, that's why her husband doesn't know about it. It seems like kind of at the last minute, she's just like, oh, by the way, I'll be back. I'm going to go show someone an apartment. It seemed like her going to show this guy an apartment was very last second, and maybe someone just contacted her and she was like, we want those units. These are apartment complexes that we are running. We want these units filled. So if someone takes an interest and they can see you right away, go do it. That's what me and my girlfriend had to do with our apartment. It was less than 48 hours from our being accepted that we were moving in here. So it could have just been that, there was, a possible tenant and Jean wanted to jump on it. And that could be why it was sudden as well. It seems just so amateurish that this person would lure her there under the guise of wanting to kill her there, because he's just so out in the open. But if maybe there's other motives involved, or maybe it was like they were going to have a discussion about something, and he was maybe the possibility of having to take her out was, a possibility again, but something that this person would hope they wouldn't have to do. Again, this is simply a theory based on a few items in the case, that maybe this was more of a secretive meeting that went awry, as opposed to a killer looking to lure a victim to a place to do just that and kill them. I just wanted to put that out there because in the information I've gleaned on the case, I haven't seen anybody consider that possibility. It wouldn't have to be a blackmail. It wouldn't have to be just the possibility that maybe this was some kind of secretive meeting that Jean was forced to go to deal with some particular situation. Again, it's just a theory. And again, that there's nobody could think of any reason why somebody would want to kill Jean. And is it possible that, I think it's very possible that this individual maybe was somebody who had, not necessarily like the theory I just posed, but someone who had either met or seen Jean around town and became fixated. And here's a woman who's got a good career. She has a husband and a family, and they're working as accountants. They're running apartment complexes. Like, this is a very successful woman. And is it possible that someone again met her in passing or saw her and became fixated and either tried to lure her there as a way to meet her and express how they felt, and when she didn't reciprocate that, as you wouldn't do, this individual became irate and attacked her. I mean, that's certainly not rare. How many stories have we heard about people getting killed by somebody who obsessed over them and killed them because they were rejected, or because they just were like, the classic, well, if I can't have you, then nobody can. These are just a few possible ideas as to why she could have been murdered, because it seems like the police right out of the gate had really no idea who was responsible for this and who would want to do something like this. So pondering exactly what happened is extremely difficult, because it's all borderline circumstantial stuff. There's not really an element of this case that's a solid piece of evidence pointing to any one specific person. Now, what is interesting, and the police pretty quickly dismissed this as being related to the murder of Jean Peters, but a little more than 5 months before Jean was killed, an older couple named Henry and Ann Peterson were also murdered in the Salem area, only about a mile away from where Jean was killed at the Glenona Apartments. Now, the Petersons were killed at the Canterbury Apartments, which was an apartment complex that they were running. So, in the same town, only a mile apart, we have 3 murder victims, 2 instances of murder. And in both cases, we have the people who ran certain apartment complexes, and they were all killed at the complexes that they ran. So, I mean, that alone does not indicate absolutely there's a connection between the 2 murders. But it's very, very coincidental. I mean, what are the odds that 2 situations so specific as that happen, and they happen fairly close together, time-wise? They happen in the same city, in fact, practically in the same general neighborhood. There was pretty much just one big park separating their apartment complexes. So the police, they didn't think there was a connection. The Petersons had been stabbed to death as well. It was practically almost the same kind of crime under very similar circumstances. It was so comparable that the police said, we don't think there's a connection, but we're not gonna, completely dismiss the possibility that they could be related. But I think they were probably trying to skew away from that, and it was just it was such a frustrating situation, because here we are, it's September 1978. And the murder of Jean Peters was, as far as the newspapers I read, was the fifth murder that occurred and just was lingering as being unsolved. There was her case, there was the case of the Petersons. There was also the case of a middle-aged gentleman by the name of Otto Frank Kutch, who was found in an alleyway by the Capitol Theater in Salem, and it appeared he had just been kind of brutally beaten to death and left in this alleyway. And it's interesting, when I went to look at that location just to see where it was at, what its possible relation might have been to where these other murders happened, I actually recognized the specific alleyway as on a trip. My girlfriend and I passed through Salem, and I actually took some pictures of the area that's literally directly behind the alleyway. So I was right there a couple of years ago where this guy was murdered, and that kind of threw me for a second when I looked at Google imagery, and I looked at it and I was like, this looks very familiar to me. Even just hearing the word alleyway, because I knew we were kind of parked in this kind of area that was hidden between buildings. And then in April, a young girl named Stephanie Ann Newsom went missing, and her body was found a short while later, several miles south of Salem. And I actually cover the Stephanie Ann Newsom case along with another girl named Ann Ellenwood. These were two girls that disappeared from that Salem Corvallis area, and unfortunately Ann's remains have never been found, but it's assumed that she was murdered, and it's always been assumed that Ann and Stephanie were, killed by the same individual, that they were both abducted. And it was just interesting how much they connected together. They even both delivered newspapers. Both girls did, down to little details like that. And so there's another video in this series that's actually a much older video I did, but I delve into that case and how there's a pretty strong suspect in that case, but because he's dead now, you can't put 100% stamp on it. So there, again, as I said when I started this video, there was so many, murder cases going on during this time. Lots of cases lingering as unsolved. And in particular, here in 1978, there were several murders that were looming as unsolved, which in a town like Salem, which is, pretty decent in size, but it's hardly New York City. That's troubling when you have that many murders going unsolved. And so as the case progresses, but there's no actual progress happening here, again, all authorities really had was, again, it just started as a reference. There was a man seen in the area, and that turned into a man and a car. But again, authorities, said that this wasn't related to the case. And it's very interesting because literally, specifically, one of the officers in the matter literally says that they're searching for this man in his vehicle, but this individual is not in no way connected with the crime. So they're saying openly, this person is not remotely a suspect, we know he didn't do it. Before saying that the reason they're looking for him is because they wanted to determine why he was there, if this individual had a legitimate reason for being there. But he's not remotely a suspect. And I'm like, how can authorities say that when they don't even know who this person is? They don't know why he was in the area. You don't have to say this is the suspect, but you have to say, we're interested in knowing what's going on, and we're not going to state what status he's at. We'll try to find him and talk to him, and then we'll decide whether he's innocent, a person of interest, or a bona fide suspect. But it was astonishing to me that authorities were just like, nope, he's not a suspect. Not at all. But they were focused enough on this guy to get a full description of the man and the vehicle that he was driving, and they made out a composite sketch of the man. And most of the information I found on this case about a week after in terms of the newspaper articles I looked at, about a week after the murder took place, pretty much all information dried up. And the place where it left off was, who was this mystery man? And by 1995, I found another article that was diving into it. It was the only real thing I found on the case between 1978 and now that really delved into the details. It wasn't just a basic reference, or it wasn't just a little piece in relation to an article. It's like, here's a list of a bunch of unsolved murders. And in that, they make it abundantly clear, the police made a composite sketch of someone, and was this person the killer? By 1995, it was readily accepted that this person very likely could have been the killer and should have at least been a serious person of interest. So again, it's like, why did the police act like this didn't matter? And the man in question was described as wearing a kind of green-colored windbreaker type jacket. He was likely in his late 20s. He had blonde hair, in one source described as platinum blonde hair, that kind of went down and was kind of just above the shoulders. It was just kind of, through here. He also had a mustache and a goatee, or a pointed beard, as it was initially reported. And the vehicle in question was a green, souped-up looking 1969 Pontiac GTO. Now, again, it was green in color and had a white stripe on the side of it. And after seeing, a few newspaper articles that were like, we're looking for a man in a car, there really wasn't, again, as I said before, there wasn't really any more information beyond that being given initially. It came out that one of the tenants of that apartment complex said that they stepped outside and saw this man sitting in this vehicle. So he was parked in close proximity to the apartment complex, close enough that someone could literally be right there in front of their unit and see the individual there and see him clearly enough to give a full description of how he looked, head and shoulder wise, and his vehicle. He saw this individual, went back inside, came out about 5:45, so this would be after Jean was killed. The man and the car were gone by that point. Which it even adds more, I feel, to what I was discussing earlier about just the vibes I get that this was a novice criminal. I was discussing earlier about how, like, you're gonna go meet up with someone that you're gonna kill, and you do it in a situation like this where you can so easily be seen. And now we know that, if this guy was the killer, he was just sitting casually in his car waiting for Jean to show up. Now, while all the information I found back in 1978 is, shows what was going on immediately afterwards, and there was still a lot of things that authorities weren't, really sure about, kind of leaving, they didn't even know if they were maybe going to figure out the identity of this guy in this car. And when she was given an autopsy, it was actually determined that Jean had not died as a result of her stab wounds. That, obviously probably would have killed her, but that it was actually due to a blow to the head that had actually killed her. And so the theory is suggested the killer went in for the attack. Jean fought aggressively and probably fought a lot harder than this guy thought she would. And so as a scuffle ensues, he strikes her in the head. And that, maybe disorients her a bit, but she's obviously going to keep fighting. And so then it follows that he after hitting her over the head and possibly kind of, dazing her a bit, he then goes in and stabs her repeatedly. And so if it is a sexual assault, because here's the thing, by 1995, when I read this article from 1995, they were saying that they felt that the intent was a sexual assault, and it went awry when Jean Peters decided to fight so hard. So an attack ensued, the killer doesn't realize this is going to happen, and in the melee that is happening, he ends up just stabbing her violently. And then it's like, she's dead. The killer has to get out of there. And again, that's definitely possible. It would explain, why she still had her clothes on. So it very well could have been she was led somewhere for a sexual attack, and the police said that they felt it was a complete stranger that had attacked her, someone that she had not known previously. And that's possible. Again, as I discussed before, if it was something like that, like she was lured there by someone, it could have been somebody she met in passing, or it could have just been somebody, like, whoever did this had to have taken notice of her beforehand, because they would have to know who she was. They would have to know that she ran this apartment complex. They would have to find out that there was a unit available. And most importantly, they would have to know that she was going to show up. Both Jean and her husband owned this apartment complex. What if he came with her, or what if he came instead of her? Then the whole plan is blown. So this wasn't just some guy like, I'm gonna just call and hope a woman shows up that I can attack. Like, whoever did this, whether they knew her or not, they had to know of her, and they had to know enough about her to know those basic details, or else things wouldn't have gone down the way they did. It had to be set up to where Jean came by herself. So again, it very well could have been sexually motivated, and it just didn't get that far. The individual had to escape, and it's interesting, again, if he's parked right there, so close to the apartment, because you'd think this guy's fleeing with abandon. He's flying out of the apartment, that vacant unit. He races to his car, dives in, peels rubber, trying to, you need to get out of there before you're seen. That's what anybody in that position is going to try to escape as quickly as possible, before they're seen. And I'm interested if it's, most homes, I mean, it depends. But for instance, my apartment complex, and like I understand this, this apartment complex wasn't built all that long ago, but our doors don't automatically lock. Most homes' doors don't automatically lock when you close them unless you have them specifically set that way. Most places you need to lock the door manually, either turn the lock when you're inside or use your key from the outside. What I'm getting at is that apartment unit was locked. Now, was it just a key lock where you can maybe lock the door from the inside and close it? And the killer might do that to buy themselves some time. Someone shows up, they can't get into the apartment yet. Or was it by chance that these doors locked automatically? I mean, it's a small detail, but it's something to consider, because it doesn't seem to me a guy in this scenario, he's already going to be disoriented by the fact that things didn't go remotely the way he thought they were going to. That individual is going to be distraught. They're going to be thinking fight or flight, and in this case, flight. So they're not going to take the time to pause to lock the door. At least I don't think they would. So I just find it interesting that this person would have had to have fled the home, but the door was still locked. It's a small detail, but it's something that intrigues me, because I doubt back then, lots of people were still leaving their doors unlocked in general. I doubt those doors locked automatically. So, I mean, obviously the killer would have had to have done it. I'm just trying to cover all the bases, What were the full circumstances with which this individual tried to escape? But it seems like, even as authorities were trying to figure out who this individual was, the details just kind of faded, because by the time the 70s are ending and going into the 80s, this is just becoming one of those cases that pops up again on lists, of people whose cases are never solved, and there's usually little more additional information. They just fade away. So hopefully, I mean, I feel like I'm being a lot more speculative in this video than in others, but it's just me trying to understand the case, because in a lot of cases I've covered in this series, either there's valid potential suspects to address, or the suspect was seen or possibly monitored by someone. There's the case of this couple that lived, I believe, in Junction City, that I did a video on, the Dades, who were both killed. The husband was found dead in their apartment, and the wife was found dead under her burning car. And the guy that is believed responsible, that was seen with her, literally, she ran to a neighbor's door, and the neighbor who answered the door saw the guy who was probably the killer come up and pull her away, literally saw him face to face. And we still don't know who that was or who killed the Dades. And in this case, you know, in terms of suspects, up to this point at least, up until 1995, all we have is a glimpse of a guy in a green car. So it was one of those situations. But in 1995, there were a few possible leads. And the first and only potential suspect that I've seen referenced at all in all of this, which was a guy named Marvin T. Vermillion, who was arrested in 1988 for a couple of assaults that he committed back in 1987 up in Washington. He had essentially lured some real estate women to a location, probably under the guise of talking about property or something like that, and then, locked them up, tied them up, and sexually assaulted them. And so by the time we get to the mid-90s and then several years later, Vermillion suddenly, his situation becomes known to investigators who in 1995 reopened the Jean Peters murder after it, was sitting dormant and unsolved for 17 years. And, initially I was like, I don't know, like one woman gets killed. And now, mind you, this is, 10 seconds of thinking on my part. I'm like, in one situation, one woman is killed. And in another situation, this guy is just essentially groping women. And then, like, that was it. But we have to remember, if the killer of Jean Peters was really there with the intention of a sexual assault, if she had let him do it or he had overpowered her, would that have been all it was? Was he sexually assaulted her and then left? And then in that situation where Jean Peters doesn't die, would it really be all that different than what Marvin Vermillion was doing to these real estate women? Because essentially what he did was he lured these women to a location and then, overtook them. And in the case of Jean Peters, was she lured to that apartment with those, same possible motives? And according to the article, I haven't been able to find any pictures of Marvin Vermillion, but they say that many features about him match closely with the composite sketch that was put together based on this man that was seen sitting in his car. And it's just like, what are the odds that someone, just a couple minutes before a woman's murder in that apartment, what are the odds that some random stranger's just sitting there chilling in his car outside? And he's not connected to this. Obviously, there's a possibility, but it seems pretty far-fetched. And of course, it could have been anyone else who maybe had the types of desires that Marvin Vermillion had, or it could have been, someone that had just the desires to sexually assault someone. And it's interesting because I referenced at the start of this, in the string of murders that, happened in kind of the Salem, Corvallis area throughout the 70s. And there was a woman named Kathy Owens who was murdered, I believe, in 1971 that I did a video about. And her attacker, I'm pretty sure, wasn't actually apprehended until the early 80s. I think it was almost 10 years. And her situation, if, again, Jean Peters' attack is sexually motivated, or was sexually motivated, and it just didn't happen, it's almost kind of comparable to the Kathy Owens murder, because this was a guy that lived close by, that didn't really know her, but knew she lived there and kind of became obsessed with her, and he would kind of like try to watch her in her home. And then one day he crossed that line where he crept into her home at night. And he ended up, attacking her and killing her. But I think initially it was like a sexual thing that was driving this guy. And that happened in the Salem area. Now, that particular guy, I'm not saying that particular guy is the same person that killed Jean Peters, although he would have been free at the time. I don't know exactly where he was living in 1978, and the ways that the attacks were done were fairly different. This guy snuck into Kathy Owens' home in the middle of the night, and he like tried to choke her out. It was a very different set of circumstances, but still, when you talk about a situation that may have started as just a sexual assault and it becomes murder, I mean, all of a sudden there's a lot more possible suspects, because you can't just say, oh, well, maybe this was just a serial killer. No, and sex people with sex offenses on their record, there's substantially more of those people than there are serial killers or people that just have murdered before. So, there's so many random people who maybe never murdered again that could be responsible for this case, and you'd never think it was them because you wouldn't think of those individuals as killers. But in returning to Marvin Vermillion, another detail that investigators found particularly interesting was that during 1978, at the time that Gene Peters was killed, Vermillion was living in Clackamas County, which is actually, that's where I live now, is where I lived most of my life. I've lived about 26 of my 35 years in Clackamas County, but Clackamas County borders Marion County. Marion County borders Clackamas County to its south. Marion County is where Salem is. Now, it didn't say specifically where in Clackamas County Vermillion lived. Clackamas County's fairly good size, but it means he could have literally lived within 15 miles of the apartment complex where Jean and her husband ran it, where they lived. So he would have been in fairly close proximity to all of this at that exact time. And that's always a detail that gets people's attention, especially if it's somebody who maybe usually is living somewhere else. Is, oh, all of a sudden you were conveniently in the area. It doesn't prove that you did it, but it certainly makes people want to look at you a little bit more closely. And I don't know how that situation progressed, if at all. It said in the article, and this happens so much in these unsolved cases when you're trying to look into suspects, when investigators try to get the information, more details about Marvin Vermillion's attacks on these women back in 1987, they were told that those records routinely, it's always routine, those pieces of evidence were destroyed. So all the evidence in relation to that case was destroyed, and they'd been destroyed at the end of 1994. So literally like right before investigators in Gene Peters' case wanted to access this evidence that had been, kept away for 7 years or so, 6-7 years, and then it gets destroyed just a couple of months before they want to come and look at it. So what are you going to do? It's just unfortunately one of those things. As far as the Vermillion angle, whether he was spoken to, interviewed, interrogated on this matter, and they deemed, he always was kind of one of those guys that lingered as a suspect, but there was never enough to get him on. I don't know if that happened, or the other angle is he gets interviewed, they talk to him, and they either come away thinking, nah, this guy wasn't involved, or they come away with information that shows that literally he couldn't have been involved. He was definitively proven to be here that day. He had an alibi, so to speak. But one other detail from this article from 1995, so this is more than 25 years ago, that gives me hope that this case that is now more than 40 years old and still just sitting there waiting for a resolution, is that DNA samples were established from the blood that was recovered in the kitchen and living room areas that was recovered from the crime scene. And it was established that some of this blood was not Gene Peters' blood, which means it had to be blood from her attacker, which means currently they have the killer's DNA. It's just a matter of whether they'll be able to test it against the right person. But at least they have that much, which is more than you can say for a lot of these cases. Even these cases from back in like the 70s. There's cases from the 80s that, they don't even have legitimate DNA samples for. So as long as that DNA's there, and as long as we know it belongs to whoever killed Jean Peters, that means she has a substantially better shot of having her murder solved one day compared to a lot of other cases from that time period that still loom as mysterious. So before I finished this video up, I'm actually currently editing it as I'm recording this clip. It's almost a bit of an addition, an addendum, if you will, because I guess I'm adding it to the original sitting that I did talking about this case. Because one thing, everybody's always going to ask the question, and I didn't really address it in the video, so I guess I should at least address it to a point. You know, when somebody turns up dead like this, people always have to consider the possibility, were they killed by a loved one? A lot of times when women turn up dead, was their husband responsible? And I guess it's pertinent to assess that possibility, although I personally don't think Jean's husband was responsible in this case. It would have taken a lot of things to fall into place, and if he called her and lured her somewhere, and what would the motive be for him to kill her? We can't really think of anything. He would have had to disguise his voice, disguise who he was, and even then, once you know, him and his wife run this location together, I find it very unlikely that if he was going to try to lure his wife some way and kill her and get away with it, that he would lure her to an apartment complex that they both run together, setting up a potential. And I discuss in this how kind of foolish this whole setup was. Whoever did this, that they lured her to an apartment complex where a bunch of people could see what happened. It would be even more ignorant for her husband to do that, because the people that live there, they know their landlord, they know who he looks like. He was actually, you know, the Harrises, who'd lived there for a long time, he was friends and close with them. It would be so foolish of him to lure his wife to this place that they kind of co-own together and to kill her there. So many people, without him even knowing, so many people who lived there could have seen him. They could have seen him pull up. They could have seen him in the vicinity of the building. Now the husband is known to have contacted the Harrises, asking them to check up on his wife. Now this was, you know, probably at least 40 minutes after she was killed. Now, they didn't live far from the apartment, so he could, because obviously he would have had to have been back at home. This is the 1970s. He didn't have a cell phone that he could call her from anywhere with. And he called the Harrises from their home. Now, he could have been there, killed her, and made it home in more than enough time. But the fact that he was at home, the fact that nobody saw him there, and, you know, you can make the argument that it's a little suspicious that he called. You know, if he locks the door when he leaves, why would he call the neighbors to check up on the place to see if his wife's okay? Now, on the one side, yeah, you can say he's setting himself up to look innocent by almost getting witnesses for a side, like, oh, he called us and he was concerned and we checked and he showed up because he had to let us into the room. But I think in this scenario, for this case, the actions of the husband were genuine, and that I don't think he was involved. I don't see what motive he would have had to do it. They worked together. They were pretty well off. They were well off enough to own multiple apartment buildings. I don't think there was financial issues. I found nothing that suggested they had marital problems, that one was cheating on the other. Any of the classic motives that one might have to to want to rub out their significant other. I just found that nowhere in this story. So it didn't make sense unless her husband had a screw loose, which I didn't find that either. So I don't really see any motive in this whole thing. And I just think the actions he engaged in the day that his wife died were genuine. I think, he didn't know that she was going to go show someone the apartment. Whoever she showed it to probably was intentionally secretive about that so that nobody else would know, as would make sense if you're planning on killing someone. And that's just how it went down. And after some time, he became genuinely concerned, contacted some, people that they knew really well at the apartment complex. And then he had to come down and unlock the room. So, that's me addressing that very serious question. Well, could the husband have done it? I don't think so. Could he have? Would he have had time to? Yeah. But that's all there really is to point a finger at the husband. I don't think he was responsible at all. Yeah, so alas, I tried to do searches matching Marvin, Vermillion, Gene Peters, and I found nothing. In my newspaper database, any searches, it just seems to have kind of faded away. So I don't know if they just decided not to pursue him anymore as a possible suspect. Maybe again they did, and it just didn't go anywhere. But it seems like not long after that, because in the 1995 article, they stipulate that he was serving time, like at that time. However, as I was trying to look up information on the guy, pointing towards my case, I noted that in 1998, he'd obviously been released already, because it's only 3 years after this article. In 1998, he robbed a bank. He came in, said he had a bomb, and he robbed a bank, but the money that the teller gave him had a tracking device on it, and he didn't even make it a block from the bank before he was caught by police and arrested and busted for bank robbery. So this guy comes off to me as one of those just kind of lifers, those lifelong, they just can't stop committing crimes. I mean, back in the late 80s, he's luring women places to assault them, and a decade later, he's robbing banks. So it was interesting, but it didn't really get me anywhere in terms of the Gene Peters case. And alas, that's where we still kind of sit on the matter. But that DNA is there. As far as I know, that DNA is still there, waiting to be matched against the right suspect. And I hope, as I do in all the cases I cover, this is, I do this series to keep these stories alive, especially ones like this, where most of the information I find is old newspaper articles. There isn't even really a whole lot of, Google search information about the Gene Peters case. It's just, it's very obscure, and I try to keep cases like that alive in this series, but always with the hope that as they sit here lingering unsolved in mystery, that someday soon that mystery will be resolved. And I can only hope that in the case of Gene Peters, who, was just trying to do, what she signed up for, find someone a place to live. And you try to do something that simple, and you end up paying with your life just because the wrong person happened to be making that inquiry with you. But I did notice, and this is another correlation to Kathy Owens, who was a University of Oregon student. They established, after her passing, they established a scholarship in her name. That same thing was done for Jean Marie Peters. I noticed that each year someone gets a scholarship for school, and it's a scholarship named after Jean Peters. So it's nice that that's there. It's nice that in a, technical world, 2021, everything we could possibly need is available on the internet. Information about this horrible thing that happened to this woman is still generally obscure. But with something like that, like a scholarship to be given out each year, that's a nice way to know that regardless of the circumstances, regardless whether this case is actually solved or not, Jean Marie Peters' name is still out there, getting the attention that it deserves, in at least one respect. And that is the story of the 1978 murder of 31-year-old Jean Marie Peters in Salem, Oregon. And like all the rest, I hope one day it's solved. And that's it. I'd like to thank you so much, as always, for watching, for supporting my channel, for supporting this series. As long as there's cases that I'm really driven to cover in this and, doing this little bit that I can to keep them alive, I'm going to continue doing them. And if you want to help support me, support my channel, support what I'm doing in this series, as well as my channel in general, remember, give the video a like, share it around if you want, subscribe to my channel. Helping it grow always helps me, in my endeavors with this channel. If you want to hit up my Patreon and help me out that way, I'm trying to post things multiple times a week, extra forms of content that you can see if you become a Patreon supporter there. The link to that is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit subreddit pages, just other resources related to what I do here on my channel. So one more time, thank you so much for stopping by, for giving this video a view. This is the kind of stuff I really do hope people watch to keep cases like this alive. And all that said, till next time, this has been Steve, the Amateur Historian.